ladies and gentlemen. Once again, Steven Rappaport on behalf of John Morrell. At the beginning of this case, I told you that Mr. Bilodeau was a bully. I called him a bully based upon his actions that night. What do we know about him? The big guy, he was aggressive, according to Time Moore. We know he was about 6'4", 6'5". We know he was well over 200 pounds. We know that when Eklund walked into that bar that night, that just prior to coming in, he was either pushed, shoved, or elbowed by Bilodeau. Bilodeau was looking to pick a fight with a man who was approximately 5'8", was well under 200 pounds, a head smaller, a full half-body lighter. This is what he did that night. He was looking to pick a fight. He was looking to pick a fight with a much smaller man. A much smaller man who, while may have had a reputation for being a fighter in his youth, was buzzed. So buzzed, in fact, I submit to you that, think about it, Dick Eklund putting a beer in his pocket to try to sneak a beer out past Mr. Kazimbola so that he wouldn't know that he had taken a beer out of his establishment. A man who, even when he came in, the signal was not to serve him because he was too buzzed. His own words, he was buzzed. You heard his explanation as to what happened outside. There are 3 people out in this alley, and you have a fist coming out of the crowd. Dick Eklund really didn't even know what was going on there. 5 years later, he couldn't come in here, and this is the clean Dick Eklund, couldn't come in here and tell you what actually happened then. That night, Bilodeau was acting like a bully. I also called him a brawler. Why did I call him a brawler? Well, I called him a brawler because of what happened in that 3 to 5 seconds after Eklund and Mr. Morrell walked out of the bar. It's very interesting that the only person who could actually tell you what happened outside was Mr. Morrell. If Mr. Morrell had said, well, we walked outside the bar and Bilodeau came at my uncle and I went to protect him. No, that's not what he said. I submit to you what he said and the way in which he said it, his recounting of the events is absolutely credible. Why do I say that? Because he tells you that when they stepped outside the bar, Dick Eklund threw a punch at Bilodeau. Now, it may have been in response to the flicking of a cigarette, some thought that there was some aggressive action by Bilodeau. But he didn't say that Bilodeau threw the first punch at his uncle or threw the first punch at him. He said, my uncle came out and threw a punch, missed, and then started to dance away. At the same time, he says, Bilodeau throws a punch at Eklund, and he misses. At this point, and remember, there's no question that this is a happenstance within 3 to 5 seconds. You've heard about a potential altercation brewing between Eklund and Bilodeau over a 5-minute period, and certainly over a 5-minute period, people have a chance to think and reconsider their actions and try to do the right thing. John Morrell walks outside of that bar. He sees Eklund throw a punch at Bilodeau, sees Bilodeau throw a punch at Eklund, and he's standing there. Within that 3 to 5 seconds, he sees this rather large man, Bilodeau. What does he do? He squares and he cocks. Mr. Morrell's reaction at that point was instinctive. He had come outside, you heard from Mr. Kazimbola, there was a very, very small opening in that door. There was no way that Morrell could have gotten back into the place to avoid being hit. Fighter's instinct. Mr. Morrell made no bones about it. He had been trained as a boxer in his youth. He sees a guy square and cock, he threw a punch. Now, what happened after he threw the punch is tragic. It's absolutely tragic. That Mr. Bilodeau went down, hit his head, and passed as a result of that. It is absolutely tragic. But what Mr. Morrell did at that point is based upon a reasonable belief that he would have suffered bodily injury. A belief that anybody in his position would have had, an understanding that he actually had at that time. What was his reaction? Did he pick up a weapon? Did he use a bottle? No, he used the only amount of force at his disposal that was reasonable in those circumstances to prevent himself from getting punched. There was no retaliation, there was no indication of revenge, there was no second punch, there was no kicking once the man went down, nothing of that nature. It was one defensive punch, and that's all it was. Look, things happen. After midnight, perhaps after 1 in the morning, at a bar in a hardscrabble neighborhood, the type of place this was, this could have been something that would have happened in any bar of that type on any Friday night where two people have an altercation. But in this case, someone hit their head on the curb and died. It wasn't that much different than what could happen outside of any establishment in the city of Lowell on a Friday night at 1 or 2 in the morning. Folks, it's a very simple issue as to John Morrell. In the 3 to 5 seconds that he and Mr. Bilodeau came together, and Mr. Bilodeau, as large a man as he was, and taking into consideration the frailty of human nature, was Mr. Morrell's response, the one punch, in response to the threat that he perceived from Mr. Bilodeau, was that so unreasonable? I submit that it wasn't. I submit that Mr. Morrell was acting in self-defense the moment he threw that punch. Now, certainly, Mr. Butterworth had asked Mr. Morrell a significant question in this. Said, well, didn't you plead guilty to manslaughter? Yeah, I did. Well, why'd you plead guilty to manslaughter? Well, if I'm convicted of manslaughter, I face the potential penalty of 20 years in state prison. I was offered a plea bargain opportunity where I got 22 months in the House of Correction. I submit to you that under the circumstances, in the context of a criminal case with a potential penalty of 20 years, Mr. Morrell did the most pragmatic thing and looked at his future, looked at his daughter's future, looked at his wife's future, and said, this is the only way for me to get out of this situation and to know that I'm going to get out of this situation and get my life back together again. Folks, that particular night, though, Mr. Morrell had very little time to consider his alternatives. He was confronted by an aggressive, large man who was getting ready to assault him, and he acted in self-defense. I hope that that's the way you view the evidence in this case, ladies and gentlemen. Hearing everything you heard about the way Mr. Bilodeau was acting that night, I submit to you that Mr. Morrell did act reasonably in this case.